One issue that was in the news a lot from about 10 to 20 years ago was the question of earmarks, money that elected officials could get into budgets to pay for pet projects in their home districts. This was highly controversial because some of those earmarks were for things like highways and bridges that nobody used. Many of these earmarks were designed solely so that an elected official could run for re-election by claiming to bring home a lot of money and a lot of jobs, but some earmarks actually serve a good purpose. Earmarks can help pay for organizations that provide social services or create works of art, or even build bridges that a lot of people use. So what if there were a way for we the people to decide how that money is spent, instead of leaving it to elected officials who are trying to garner the support of special interest groups? There is. It's called participatory budgeting, and it's the topic for this episode of Progressive Solutions. Before we get into our topic, just a reminder that I welcome your comments. I want to know what you think about this issue and other issues, what you'd like to hear about. So leave your comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. And also be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so that you'll be notified when future videos are finished. And help spread the word. More involvement means better communities. Participatory budgeting, or PB for short, was first developed in Brazil in the 1980s, mainly as a reaction to the end of 20 years of military dictatorship. By 1988, when the new Brazilian constitution was adopted, PB was ready for prime time, and a year later it was adopted in the city of Porto Alegre. It was wildly popular. A decade later, 100 cities across Brazil had adopted it. It's also now used mostly at the city level across South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, as well as across Canada and the US. I say mostly at the city level, but PB projects have been implemented to great success in schools and housing projects as well. In the US alone, schools in Boston, Chicago, New York, Phoenix, and San Antonio have used PB, and housing projects in Toronto and Los Angeles have made great strides with participatory budgeting, as corrupt practices were replaced by open democracy. So how does participatory budgeting work? The basic process is simple. It starts by setting aside funding for local projects. Organizations then submit proposals, including how much money they're asking for, and then people vote on their favorite project. The project getting the most votes gets funded. And then, if there's any money left over, and there usually is after just one project, the next highest project gets funded. And this continues down the line until funding runs out. Usually there's a small amount of money left over, and this can either be returned to the general fund or rolled over into the next year's round of PB. The rest is details. But sometimes those details can be vital. One study of PB projects in Surakarta, Indonesia, found that subunits with more poor people receive a smaller percentage of funding than would correspond to their share of the general population, with the poorest subunits less likely to submit proposals in the first place. Another study of PB in Brooklyn, New York, found the process has not necessarily prompted a reprioritization of budget allocations or changes in power dynamics and racial hierarchies, at least not yet. This was because better funded groups could campaign for votes. If people who most need the money can't submit a proposal, they're out of luck. Even those who can submit a proposal, if they don't have the resources to campaign for that proposal, they may be out of luck as well. Another important detail is that for PB to succeed, the political establishment has to support it. If political leaders turn against PB, it dies. And, well, that's probably why when a more right-wing party took control in Porto Alegre in 2016, they suspended the PB program just 1 year later. There also has to be a perceived need for it. Going back to Porto Alegre, one reason that the new political leaders were able to suspend the program is that federal funding for the city's needs grew dramatically in the past 20 years, and it reduced the need for local funding to fill the gaps. This gave the new political leaders cover to suspend the program. Another crucial detail is that enough money has to be set aside for these projects to get a lot of them voted in. If there's only enough money for 1 or 2 projects to get funded out of potentially dozens of requests, then the vast majority of people who voted will feel that their voices weren't heard as their favorite project didn't win one of the funding slots. Participatory budgeting isn't perfect and probably can't ever be, but is that a reason not to implement it? Or are there positive effects that are large enough to be worth that effort? Well, let's take a look at some of the successes. I mentioned that Porto Alegre had suspended its PB program, but over the 25 plus years of its existence, it transformed the city. Most of this progress occurred in the first 15 years when the left-wing Workers' Party was in control. Those projects increased water and sewage connections from about 75% to 98% of homes. The number of schools in the city quadrupled, and a lot more people got involved in local government affairs. And that's one of the key takeaways from PB. It raises participation. More people, especially people who generally don't feel that they have the time, the energy, or the resources to participate, are making their voices heard in their communities. The other key takeaway is that when it's implemented with the full support of local government, even with the barriers I mentioned, it still makes a big difference in the lives of people who most need help. Some specific winners in recent years just in New York City, where each city council district gets its own allocation, include improvements in public housing projects such as lighting for parks, new playgrounds, security cameras, and mobile food pantries. Upgrades to public schools including improved water fountains, bathroom renovations, new computer labs, arts facilities and playgrounds, and upgrades to HVAC systems. Upgrades to community facilities, including library upgrades, new computer labs, and improvements to access and transportation for people with disabilities. Parks got new playgrounds, upgrades to trash collection and pickup, heated bathrooms for year-round use, long overdue repairs to facilities, and even a couple of dog runs. The list goes on and on. Even in the wealthier neighborhoods, people generally voted to help those who most need help. This all works very well at the very local level, but could participatory budgeting work at higher levels of government, such as state or national governments? So far, even in larger cities like Porto Alegre, Chicago, and New York City, PB is implemented only at the district or ward level. Scaling up presents new challenges. There would be a huge difference between local PB and large PB systems. Under the local systems already in place, proposals are small and voters can see specifically how those proposals affect them and their neighborhoods. Once PB is scaled up to areas covering millions of people, the proposals would have to be much larger and cover a much wider area. Otherwise, most people wouldn't know or care about most of what they'd be voting on, and the whole process would likely fall apart for lack of participation. In addition, the projects that generally receive funding from PB are capital projects that can be built quickly and easily and short-term community projects to fill immediate needs. Long-term programs and infrastructure projects don't usually win support by this process. This is a problem for large PB efforts. Meanwhile, at local levels, despite its limitations, participatory budgeting makes a big difference in the communities, especially as the effects are accumulated over years of participation. The total effect of all these short-term projects is much larger than the sum of the effects of each individual project. So, how can you create a participatory budgeting system in your community? I'm going to leave a few links in the description to the rules that several places are already using to help you get started. Just remember that in order for PB to succeed, it needs the support of both local elected officials and the local community, so building that support is your top priority. I actually got so excited when I was researching this idea that I'm contacting local elected officials where I live to get a PB system started right here. Do you think it could work where you live? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what other issues you'd like to see here. Thanks for watching. Stay progressive.